The chief executives of Facebook, Twitter and Google faced more than 3.5 hours of questions from U.S. senators over moderation policies. Though the hearing was meant to focus on a crucial law known as Section 230 that protects the company's ability to moderate content as they see fit, senators strayed from the brief and confronted the executives. Misinformation about voting and election interference were touched on ahead of next week's presidential vote.
A heated debate ensued on the possible amendment or repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which protects companies from being held liable for content posted by their users. During the U.S. Senate hearing, large tech companies face grilling on their responsibility to moderate content. CEO of Alphabet Inc., which owns Google, dismissed allegations that the search engine exerted undue political influence using its content.
Let me be clear. We approach our work without political bias, full stop. To do otherwise would be contrary to both our business interests and our mission, which compels us to make information accessible to every type of person, no matter where they live or what they believe.
Facebook CEO says free expression of their users will be limited if Section 230 is removed.
Right now, the discussion is focused on Section 230. Some say that ending 230 would solve all of the Internet's problems. Others say that it would end the Internet as we know it. From our perspective, Section 230 does two basic things. First, it encourages free expression, which is fundamentally important. Without 230, platforms could potentially be held liable for everything that people say. They'd face much greater pressure to take down more content to avoid legal risk.
Twitter CEO said the amendment could significantly hurt how people interact online.
Section 230 is the most important law protecting Internet speech. And removing Section 230 will remove speech from the Internet.
Things then quickly became heated. Senator Ted Cruz accused Twitter of promoting certain political views over others.
Mr. Dorsey, who the hell elected you and put you in charge of what the media are allowed to report and what the American people are allowed to hear? And why do you persist in behaving as a Democratic super PAC, silencing views to the contrary of your political beliefs?
But Dorsey refuted the claims.
We're not doing that. And this is why I opened this hearing with calls for more transparency. We realize we need to earn trust more. We realize that more accountability is needed to show our intentions and to show the outcomes.
Thank you, Senator.
So I hear the concerns and acknowledge them, but we want to fix it with more transparency.
The hearing follows U.S. President Donald Trump's repeated calls for tech companies to be held accountable for allegedly silencing conservative voices. While still wary of repealing Section 230, all three CEOs agreed that companies should be called to account if they act as the publisher.
We're joined now by Arthur Goldstuck, who is the CEO of Worldwide Works. Arthur, good evening, and thank you so much for your time. It seems very much, just judging by how proceedings went in that Senate, that the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal still very much hovers around the decisions over what some of these online companies should and shouldn't be allowed to do.
Good evening, yes, but it's also really a litmus test of the divergent opinions between the Democrats and the Republicans as they head into the elections. So the different strands of opinion that are pulling in different directions means that we're not going to get a clear outcome from this process. But certainly what it highlights is the fact that the social media giants have not taken full responsibility for the content that appears on their sites. And when they do take responsibility, they do so in a very haphazard way.
And Arthur, that's precisely part of the problem, because ultimately the basic question that needs to be answered has not been dealt with by many of these companies. If anything, there's an entire business field for trackers of information on the internet right now.
Correct. Amongst the stats that were shared during the hearings was that Facebook employs 35,000 people to moderate information. YouTube employs 10,000 people. That's a massive industry sector. just in verifying information. But the problem then comes in with what they do with that moderation and with that tracking. One of the most galling aspects of Facebook's policy, for example, is that they have these huge teams of fact-checkers, and they also employ independent outside fact-checkers to check on any content that has been flagged as potentially fake information. And when they confirm that it is fake, Facebook doesn't remove the content. They down-rank it in the news feeds. So it still appears, and people can still share it if they wish. So there's a complete breakdown of a true sense of responsibility in the name of allowing people to make their own decisions. Free choice is absolutely fine. You would expect free choice. But if you have a responsibility in times of tension to ensure that the information you carry is accurate, then you also have a responsibility to remove inaccurate information.
Well, at this point, Arthur, we enter into treacherous waters, because one just needs to look at the U.S. President Donald Trump, who on a number of occasions has tweeted information that is factually incorrect. I think in one or two instances, Twitter has taken that information down. But again, there don't appear to be any hard and fast rules around what a lot of these agencies can and will actually do in a situation like that.
Correct. Twitter, for example, makes it up as it goes along. Facebook takes action when it suits Facebook, and YouTube is very late to the game of discovering a sense of responsibility. So you can imagine that it's a little chaotic in those, let's call them moderation rooms, at those organizations at the moment.
How then does one balance, Arthur, the need for freedom of speech and freedom of expression versus misinformation and disinformation?
Freedom of speech is one thing, but posting content that is likely to lead to harm is a completely different matter. That's not free speech. That is, in some cases, incitement to violence, as we saw with the Kenosha Guard website or at least the Kenosha Guard's page on Facebook, where many people flagged the fact that it was inciting violence. And Facebook only took it down after there was, in fact, killings in the town of Kenosha as a result of those incitements to violence. That's a clear example of where freedom of speech is not really freedom of speech. That is freedom of violence. And one has to draw a distinction between speech that is likely to lead to harm and damage.
Arthur, it also sounds to me that we as consumers of these products need to start taking a lot more control, where we can at least, of what we are allowing onto our feeds. Any advice for our viewers tonight on how to do that?
My key advice would be to step back from the polarization of viewpoints, because by taking sides in a polarized discussion of, for example, Trump is totally evil to Trump is a total saint, by taking one of those stances, you're going to reject anything that contradicts your viewpoint, but you'll also agree, accept, and share anything, or agree with, rather, and share anything that supports your viewpoint. So by being part of one of two ends of polar opinion, you subject yourself, or you allow yourself to fall for misinformation and to spread that information. So take everything you read with a grain of salt, and also consider the level of balance in any coverage that you see. If it looks like balanced coverage, they're trying to give both sides of the picture, then by all means delve deeper into that. But if it's very clear that they're trying to demonize one side or another, then of course you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. But there are exceptions, and one exception is the American president, who is known to post falsehoods, but blatant falsehoods. And when those are exposed as falsehoods, people might, if they're big supporters of him, might say, yeah, but there is truth to it, or how can you deny that and then claim that the opposite is true, for example. So that becomes very difficult when you have a character like him inflaming opinion and inflaming tensions. So these are not normal times, and it's very difficult for people to see through all the smoke and flames.
Of course, one of the other things that consumers sometimes would like to change is the information that they end up with on their feed. And often that is determined by the machine. It's the algorithm that has been, designed to read you and give you the things that it thinks you like. And sometimes even that algorithm carries its own bias.
Correct. That's one area where Twitter has, in fact, said that they would try to regain the trust of the public by disclosing more information about how those algorithms operate, how they are created, and then what impact they have on what you see. Whereas with the likes of YouTube and Facebook, they change those algorithms all the time in very mysterious ways, and they don't give you full disclosure on what the effect is, what you're likely to see more of, and what less. The result of that is that people are able to draw their own conclusions. A lot of mischief makers come up with hoax claims of what you have to do if you want to see everyone in your newsfeed, or there's a story about you'll only see 25 people ever in your newsfeed unless you do the following. Now, that's not true, but unfortunately, because of the lack of clarity from these tech giants, we are allowed to make up our own stories, and those stories spread as easily as the kind of disinformation that these platforms carry.
So Arthur, are you saying that it's a myth then, this statement that in fact you only ever see the updates of about 25 people on your timeline? It certainly does feel that way.
It does sometimes seem that way, and in fact, every now and then I think, wait a minute, I haven't seen that person's post for a long time. Yeah. Then I discovered they have been posting. So we tend to find a lot of evidence that corroborates our suspicions along those lines. But it is a myth. It's something that they call confirmation bias, where what you see confirms what you believe. And that's also a factor of the kind of false information that you tend to share. And the more you share that specific kind of information, the more you're likely to be fed that kind of information as well. So confirmation bias feeds on itself, and it's a vicious cycle of disinformation and misinformation.
So much to learn and discover on the World Wide Web. Arthur Goldstruck, let's leave it there for tonight. He's the CEO of Worldwide Works.